Welcome to this week's episode of the Music.Hes Therapy podcast. My name is Ian McMillan. This week we have friend of the podcast Alan Crawford Aka Choppy, good friend of the podcast. Alan's got an online blog called Holy Well Street, which documents the subcultures in music, football, fashion and politics and anything else worth note that's happening in and around Scotland. So that's partly why we asked you to come here this week, Alan, because you've been writing for quite a while and you've done a lot of interesting stuff. So thanks very much for coming on first and foremost.
Thanks for having me, mate.
Holy Well Street, first of all, tell us a wee bit about the blog and when you started it.
I think it started about 5 years ago, Ian, and it was just, it was just for a bit of laugh, just an area where I could write about my passions you just mentioned there, which would be like the football, Celtic stuff mixed in with the bands and subculture and stuff like that. So I blended it all together and did a few good interviews with people, wrote a few articles, and I just kept going with it. And in connection with McCool's Bar as well, where those subcultures seem to be in the same place, you know. So I just thought there was an area where I could mix the football team and the bands that kind of are connected with them, and again subcultures that go with that, terrace subcultures. So yeah, that's why it started.
Was that your first kind of experience of writing stuff, and done wee bits and bobs before that?
No, that was my first stuff that I'd written, and as I say, it was just started off as a scribble, a bit of a laugh, and see where it went. And then once I started doing a few interviews with people, it grew from there. And there was always a new project that I wanted to bring in. I've brought some writers in to do bits themselves. Phil Thornton, I've had yourself on there for an interview. A few other people. Jimmy Whelan's done a few bits and bobs.
Yeah.
So I'll bring in guests, and that's just to blend it all together. And like, as I say, it's a good space for people like myself, you know.
And where did the name Holy Well Street originate from then, for those that don't know?
That's quite an interesting question, right? So Holy Well Street's a street off the Gallagate, as you come in from town, just turn right, and when you go up Holy Well Street, you turn left, and it's Janefield Street down to Celtic Park. So Holy Well Street to me is like, it's an interesting street because all that's left there is a factory. It's like a dairy, and many years ago it was busy. There was houses in front of the dairy, and across the road there was a school, and there was houses again in a yard, and then across the road there was the old railway that went round the back of Celtic Park. Now when I started going to football when I was very young, maybe 10, 11-year-old, the ruins of the houses and the yard and that were still there, and we used to hang about there as kids while the older people were in the pub just down the street a bit, the Grange Bar I think it was. And I just watched the street starting to get less and less and less. So I'd always had a thing about the street, and basically it's connected to obviously the football ground, and I thought that's a perfect name. And from that it just became a title, and then the platform was there for me to start writing. So I still look at photos of the old Holy Well Street, and it's hard to believe that it was actually a street. You know,
I've seen you posting pictures of you standing below the sign, and I'm not really aware of where you're talking about personally, because as an away fan at Celtic Park, I've become familiar with it, obviously. And my kind of nostalgic memories of going to Celtic Park as a kid, as an away fan, I just remember the tenement buildings down the bottom where we'd be parking up, and it just always seemed to be a tsunami of kids running at you.
Totally.
What's your motor, mate? What's your motor?
It was a strange area because, as I say, there was so many houses around it and connected. A back garden goes up to the away end, like many other grounds, you know what I mean? And you wouldn't believe that now. And when I stand there and sometimes take a photo, that corner was always important to me, because it could be a guy selling something or programs. And I remember just hanging about that wall, funnily enough, growing up. So the street, the wall, that wall where the actual dairy is it's important to me in a strange way. I don't know. So that's where it come from.
It's funny how stuff sticks in your memories of childhood. That it's caught your eye or a building, or it just seems iconic for you and you only.
That's a good point. That's exactly it. It's like I like to see things stand the test of time, and all that's left is that building. So I've got good memories there, you know.
And the blogs, obviously, you've said it's been on the go roughly about 5 years. In relation to music, who have you interviewed for the blog, and who's been some of your highlights so far?
I had Peter Hooton from The Farm. He was great. Paul Heaton from beautiful South. As you know, I've had Terry Farley, the DJ, and a lot of people that within Glasgow, a lot of authors like yourself, have been great coming in and getting interviews. A lot of good working class guys that are really, you'd say celebrity Celtic supporters perhaps, and they're very clued up. And I like to talk to these people and get their views on the subcultures we just talked about. You know, what was your bands? What was your favourite memories there? What was your favourite item of clothing? Take you through the 70s, take you through the 80s, what they wore. And that's something that me and you talk about all the time.
I think we spoke about this just before we started recording there. Like, there's the holy trinity of working class culture growing up, clobber, football and music. And I think most of these get attracted to all three, are obsessive or passionate about at least one or two of these subjects. I mean, I don't think there's a boy that doesn't love football or music or clobber, do you know what I mean? And I think that's just part of being working class.
Yes. And myself, with this photographic memory that I seem to have, it becomes more passionate, just like yourself, the way we spoke before. It's like, I've got a good memory for passions, let's just say.
So you've, obviously if you haven't wrote this blog, you're well known at Celtic Park, you've done a lot of stuff in relation to the culture around it. When did you get into music? How long have you been a music fan for?
Yeah, well, much like yourself, since there was always music in my family growing up. My dad was a teddy boy, rocker, psychobilly, whatever you say, rockabilly definitely. And I was brought up in his music, and that would be Elvis, Everly Brothers, Gene Vincent, lots of rock and roll. And he never budged from that, even all through his life. It was rock and roll only, and that was it. Maybe a few country and western sort of albums. But I grown up listening to that, so there was always music there. And my cousin's Dave Nichol, he was a big influence on me. He gave me loads of 7-inch singles as a kid, and his music taste was very, very widespread, and that was like Sex Pistols, The Police, Bowie, so it was always there.
Was this the late 70s?
Yeah, that's right. It'd be about 77, 78. Dave wasn't a punk or anything like that, but he liked all of it. He liked every part of like that music in the 70s, like new wave. So big influences, you know what I mean?
There's always an older cousin and an older brother and sister, I think, that influences you at a young age. Or there's some guy lives down the street a bit who's a few years older than you and seem a bit more clued up in what's happening in the world, and they kind of pass some of that stuff on to you, I think.
100%. And there was the punks then. Remember the punks about 1977, 78, 79? And some of them lived in the street. Dean Scott, his name was. He was even pally with Watty from Exploited.
Right.
And I used to watch the punks while I was playing football, and that was the first sort of subculture I saw. And I thought they were brilliant. I thought they were rebellious. And so at 10-year-old, I thought it was a punk, you know. So, and the first band I sort of probably wanted to get into myself was the Sex Pistols, you know what I mean? But I'd be 10 or 11-year-old, and I was wearing badges and stuff like that. So.
See, I don't know we're very similar ages. I'm a year or two younger, and my experience of punk when I was really young, obviously a bit before our time really, I always was afraid of the punks when I seen them when I was young. When I was like 10 and I seen these guys with mohawks and tapping bondage trousers and biker jackets, not. I always heard they were a bit kind of intimidated by them. Some of them I knew because they were my mates' older brothers, but punk to me always had a bit of darkness about it. I thought, I was like, this is a bit scary here, what's going on with these guys, man?
It was the first subculture I saw, and I remember my mum and gran, and I said, look at the state, and I thought, yes, they're getting a reaction, you know what I mean? And I'd heard Hersham Boys with Sham 69, and I thought that was quite punk. I really liked that. And so I used to watch them, and I thought, that's for me. Then I saw the second generation mod thing, and they were just one-dimensional to me, where I lived, like Gallshiels, so I preferred the punks at that time, you know. Then by about 1981 I moved into the same scene as you, which was two-tone, and it was Madness, the Specials, Selector, and all that. Beat.
You said there you grew up in Gallshiels. What was Gallshiels like? Obviously it's a border town, right? It's down near Kelso, Melrose, that sort of stuff. What's it like in relation to, at the time, fashion subcultures? Because it's not really near a city anyway, is it?
Good question. You know, it was like Rugby Town, and it was very borders, and it was out of the way. It was quite near Edinburgh, but it was away on its own. But you always had this rebellious sort of crowd that wanted to break out. You know, I think it was one of the places that it became quite cosmopolitan for the borders. Probably the most cosmopolitan town in the borders. But there was a students' union there as well, the Harriet Watt, which is now. And with that, there was always a wee scene that rebelled against stuff, you know.
Am I right in saying there's a fashion college?
That's right, that's the one there. So when you had that mix of the students and I suppose the punks were rebellious, and there was a Thursday night students' union, and people would always go there, and it was like alternative stuff, good music and stuff like that.
So did the fashion students have an impact
Yeah,
on the tournament itself?
I would say so. Yeah, definitely. But that was the first subculture I saw, was the punks. And then by the time I was like 12, I was two-tone.
Excuse me, so that was your mere gravitate towards your own sort of trying your own choices a wee bit more then?
Yeah. I think we spoke about it. Madness was big for me. But when I look back at them now, personally, I think they're more a fun band. That's my opinion. I preferred the Selector, and I think I preferred the Beat to the Specials, funnily enough. Although the Specials are amazing. But in the Selector, I preferred them maybe sometimes to the Specials. So a bit of a mix in there, you know.
I tend to agree with you when it comes to Madness, but at that age, they're a great introduction band to any type of pop music.
They were massive.
Particularly a scene that comes from the Jamaican Trojan influence. If they're introduced, if they're just letting you peek behind the curtain of what that world's like and get your introduction to it, it's a great way to date. Madness are a great entry level band for that sort of stuff, I think.
But I remember, like, when I think back now, I didn't budge from them for too long. It was like, we've spoken about this before, it was tribes, wasn't it? And so you're two-tone skinhead and Madness is your band and Specials. And you don't admit to liking the Jam or the mod, because that's mod, or the punks, because that's Sex Pistols. And you would go to school disco and be punks at one side, ska, two-tone one, and then mods. And nobody would admit to liking each other's music. When you look back now, I mean, you blend it all together as one, don't you?
It's such a shame that one white thing you're beyond though, because if you see like Top of the Pops 2 on TV back and it's like a 1985 one or something like that, the pop music for it is generally pretty good. There's loads of great credible bands out there that were really good, and you were pretending you didn't like Spandau Ballet because it was the cool or whatever it might be.
You wouldn't admit to liking someone like that. And then when I grew into music a bit more, I would say after the two-tone scene, it was more like Simple Minds, U2, stuff like that. Came along.
So is that when you're moving into kind of secondary school time there, I suppose?
Yeah, the end of secondary school, sort of that poser scene, I suppose you could call it, where, as I say, Simple Minds, U2, Icicle Works, and a lot of good Scottish bands as well.
Was the Bunny Men in them?
Yes, without a doubt, yeah. The Jam, I do like the Jam, but I remember not admitting to that because they were mods and I was the only one, so it's really weird.
See, I love the Bunny Men now and I love the Smiths, but at the time I always remember I thought, they're a bit weird.
Oh, yeah.
Because I was so young, I just remember the guys who liked the Bunny Men, they had that haircut, they always wore long coats, and they always had their head down a wee bit, and
That's right,
they were
right.
kind of a bit mean and moody. And when you listen to their music years later, when I discovered them, their music's really not that unusual or that weird or anything like that. Not all of it, some of it's quite catchy. And McCulloch loves his football and all that, do you know what I mean? So,
actually, he's cool, you know what I mean? But back then, you wouldn't have said that. Human League as well, right into them as well. More so now, like you just said.
and U2 was huge back then,
Yeah.
Simple Minds.
Yeah, yeah.
I always find it a bit weird that U2 went on to sort of global stardom. Simple Minds seemed to stagnate. They kind of walked hand in hand at one point, U2 and Simple Minds.
Totally.
And U2 seemed to, I don't know, move beyond them, I think it was. I don't know if Simple Minds didn't evolve to the same way U2 did, but they seem to go in different directions, don't they?
Yeah, definitely. At one time, Simple Minds, I would say Simple Minds were the better out of the two, but then U2 seemed to evolve more, I think, especially worldwide. Simple Minds are still worldwide, they
For
still
sure.
tour, but yeah, there was a breakaway, I would say, you know.
I was having a debate recently with one of my colleagues about who the biggest band in Scotland's ever been. And my money's on Simple Minds probably.
Yeah.
And if you're a certain generation, I don't think Simple Minds stood the test of time, so the young ones listen to them or anything like that now.
No.
But for me, I can't think of other bands in Scotland that went on to do stadiums and all that.
I know.
I mean, they were massive, but they done a gig at Ibrox in 84, 86 was it? And they were huge at the time, and I don't remember any other band. Scotland's always had a good music scene, but where bands kind of stayed at a certain level, a lot of them. I think Texas went up to a big level and all, but probably Simple Minds, I don't know if that's factual, just my opinion, but Simple Minds certainly up there with the biggest bands Scotland's ever produced.
Couldn't disagree with that at all. Strangely enough, that 86, that was when the album Once Upon a Time came out, and a lot of Simple Minds fans were actually thinking that at that point they were going too much American, so I remember that at the time, but I still love the album myself. The albums before that were better, but yeah, there was a lot of Simple Minds fans saying that they thought they'd sort of sold or sell it a wee bit, you know.
I'd say the thing with Simple Minds and U2, there wasn't really a tribe attached to them in relation to how you dressed.
Yeah.
Obviously, some guys, they try and emulate their heroes, right? There will be guys out there with pilot boots and their hair coloured blonde or whatever, right? But what kind of clobber were you in at the time? What were you doing with yourself at weekends and stuff?
Right, that would be during the casual scene, and I remember that scene, the casual scene, there wasn't a music band attached to it, so you were looking for something, so you had you know what I mean, it was like, perhaps before that it was like the poser scene where everybody had a wedge haircut, stuff like that, and Simple Minds fitted that, Charlie Nicholas, The Love God, you know what I mean, but I remember that when the casual scene came along, I think a lot of them attached themselves to Simple Minds and U2 and stuff like that, because they were still looking for a band that they could sort of call their own. I remember that quite vividly, like looking for something. Maybe the House Martins when they came along, because Paul Heaton had dabbled in the scene himself. Pet Shop Boys, maybe stuff like that.
Well, the thing with the casual scene is, it's probably the only subculture that's no driven by music.
I know.
It's no driven by music, it's no driven by emulating a pop star. It's no driven by fashion, as in the fashion houses promote what we should be wearing. It went against that, and we were saying to them, this is what you're wearing, this is what you need to find.
I know.
Do you know what I mean? Particularly the early looks of the casual wear. Everyone was at a sports shop, a hunting shop, a mountaineering shop. It wasn't even coming out of fashion places. You had to have the knowledge where to get this stuff. It just wasn't driven by music at all.
There's a lot of people confused by it as well, because it started at football, it didn't start in London on the streets or anything like that, you know what I mean? I think somebody said once, you're looking for the next subculture, and then somebody says, oh, it's over there, and it's seen something away from like the cities, but it was a football match, which is crazy. I think Happy Mondays eventually maybe pulled off that sort of.
I wouldn't say like there is some bands football boys would be more attracted to, shall we say, right? One you just mentioned, Happy Mondays, probably most football boys probably liked them.
I think that came along.
I would say the Farm, again,
That's a good
probably
point, yeah.
Because they did dress that way, they wore gazelle, they had haircuts like that, they wore into the football.
Well, Peter Hooton did dabble as well. You know,
definitely, right. And they wrote the end fanzine and stuff like that.
Yes.
So I'm not saying they were a casual band, but they definitely had some kind of connection to the casual
right.
thing. And the Pet Shop Boys, no the music per se, right? The music was modern with the Pet Shop Boys, it was electronic.
That's right.
But Chris Lowe being a fashion icon from his football boys out there.
That's right, yeah, it was, and some of the beats to their tracks sort of fitted, I think, as well. New Order maybe, as well, maybe?
Aye, definitely.
There was something there.
Again, that it was modern, no one at that type
Yeah,
of music, it was modern, it was forward thinking. And I New Order definitely had that connotation. There probably wasn't any other bands until Oasis that were kind of laddie, I suppose.
Yes, yeah. But we've spoken about that before, definitely.
Chris Lowe certainly influenced the fashion in a massive way.
I mean, I was obviously got something to say.
Aye, that song definitely. I think, to be honest, when I look back, Chris Lowe had a lot better money than me and you. Right? He was going to Italy when nobody else was going to Italy.
Yeah.
So he was able to kick himself out head to toe in Armani or Moschino or whatever he was wearing at the time and pulled that look off down to a T.
Yeah.
He wasn't saving up his paper round, to put it that way.
Yeah.
And I think that's why he was such a sharp dresser. He still is to this day, Chris Lowe.
Yeah. You just wear one item and you could relate to it, you know.
Aye.
Yeah.
And I still remember a lot of the looks he had back then, and a lot of the stuff. The glasses are famous. The Posh Boy T-shirt,
Yeah.
the Armani jackets he had, Stone Island coats.
I think the track West End Girls in the video when they're walking through the market and they're so serious. There's something about that with that the scene, the casual scene, that somehow they could relate to that. I think, and the words to that song.
That look with the sort of pilot jackets and the black hat with boil on the front of it.
Aye.
That was quite well worn at one point
yeah.
or another. That Chris Lowe look with the boy hats.
You had to think about it, didn't you? What was going on there? So it was like, yeah, I think there was something about that track though that maybe football lads could maybe relate to.
Aye, definitely.
Yeah.
And where did you go after U2 and Simple Minds? Where did it take you?
From there, I think you'd have to be going towards the club scene after that, 1990, 89, 1990. Well, the House Martins were always there, and then the Beautiful South. I thought they were amazing. Do you know what I mean? The Beautiful South.
Agreed.
So we're going from about 88, 89, and then by the time 1990 came along, you had the farm we just talked about, the club scene that went with Happy Mondays. That all came together.
Were you attending gigs at this age or in before clubs?
I stopped going to gigs for a few years, but once I'd gone into the club scene, I went to went to see the farm when I stayed in down south. We seen in Astoria, and a few club nights where Happy Mondays played and DJs played as well. So there was a good mix going on. But the club scene from there was from 1990 to probably about 1995.
What age were you when you moved down south?
20 at the time, so I moved away from my hometown when I was 20, and I wanted to get down there and just get into all that sort of stuff, you know, the shops, the music, the clothes.
So were you chasing the culture really?
Definitely, yeah. And the club scene came right along with that, you know, and then that scene was Andy Weatherall, Terry Farley, the Boys Own Scene, many others, even further on, Justin Roberts and stuff like that. So I dived right into the club scene in for probably 45 years. And bands weren't a big thing, really, as much, you know.
Were you passionate about that music for a long time? Did you submerge yourself in it?
Yeah, a lot of it, as I say, well, Screamadelica, that was very much a big thing, Primal Scream. So all the dance music with those bands, and then as I say, I say more the club scene was the DJs, but I wasn't too taken on with many bands as such until round about '94, when I suppose Oasis came on the go at that time, wasn't it? And a lot of people like myself wanted to move away from the club scene and get back into bands. Also, the sort of clothes we were wearing back then was like catered for the club scene. Armand Bassey, Vivian Westwood,
Jean Paul Gaultier.
That's Machino, and it was only clothes you could probably wear at clubs. And eventually, I wanted to move into wearing terrace gear again. I was starting to move to want to wear that again. And funnily enough, when you saw the Oasis came on the Go and Blur, they were actually they were wearing it, the 80s clobber again. And I thought that's perfect timing because
just as you were feeling the clubbing bit.
Yes, just they were wearing it. I'm not saying Oasis were terrace lads back in the 80s, but they certainly had the look. Talking Gazelles, Berghaus, Lacoste, all the comfortable gear again I wanted to wear. So by 95 onwards I was back into terrace clobber, as I would like to call it.
I think when you talk to guys who are age or a bit older who have been into the casual thing most of their life, some guys will make out they've been into it since 82 to date, right? Yeah. Most days of that were told other scenes. Or
and there was a dip,
right?
Yeah,
I was at Scots for a bit, I was into clubbing and stuff like that,
yeah.
and your look changes slightly during that stuff, do you know what I mean? But you might still be driven by still Adidas original trainers, you might still want that, you might still have influences for your terrace roots as it were.
Yes.
And I think it did spike again and everybody kind of got back into it, probably as you say, 94 Oasis brought that sort of look back in again.
Yeah.
And then, let's be honest here, after they reissued the film and all that again,
that's all the films, the books.
That kind of come back out again, and people started to go back to football, being regular and hunting down vintage clothing and reconnecting with a lot of old mates, and the scene got a boost again in some ways, probably the late 90s again, I would say maybe.
A lot of reunions, like, you know what I mean, and a lot of, as you say, books and stuff like that. And I think that's continued now. I think that's the way people dress our crowd still to this day, more or less. You know?
Well, it's a bit like you said at the start, your dad was a rockabilly, and we're kind of stuck in our ways. We have became that old guy who's going to be sitting a pair of gazelle on at 60 and probably a wedge haircut among us or whatever, and you know.
Rock and roll will never die.
Exactly.
So, you wouldn't budge from that, it was funny.
we became that guy ourselves a bit now, unfortunately. Which is fine with me, to be honest with you, I'm pretty cool with that, I don't mind at all. So, you said Oasis in '94. Did you get into bands again back then?
Yeah, and it was like Oasis cast pulp. I suppose that Britpop thing. Maybe the less said about that, the better. But some of the bands that were in that were great, and it got you actually into other bands that were influenced by like Oasis as well. You used to hear them talking about. So then he went on a search. You were really open-minded, I think, into bands from years ago, you know, before and stuff like that. So
indie music almost took a wee bit up from there. People listening to Charlottes and stuff like that. Going back into the stuff from the late 80s, early 90s, and probably bands that had been well established, e.g. the Charlottes, probably jumped on the coattails a wee bit again. Oasis. I'm not saying the band tried to do that, but just because that type of music became popular, people will be starting to listen to the Charlatans again.
Totally. I mean, I've not mentioned the Stone Roses. I know they're a great band, amazing, and we love them. But a band I prefer better is actually Charlatans. You know what I mean? The Stone Roses only did 2 albums. I don't get the total hype, but as I say that, I'm just a bit. Even the Specials, they only did 2 albums. I love them as well, but I prefer the beat to the Specials. So it's just me. It's a different taste. The Charlatans to me, I prefer more to Stone Roses.
See, I love the Stone Roses, I liked it back in the day, but I get them no hell known as much, and I think it's the whole cliche thing puts me off them a little bit now. It's as though they've kind of become something they weren't.
I'm quite surprised how big the reunions were and stuff like that. Each to their own, you know. I
remember the Stone Roses when they came out. It was almost a bit like the fitness culture was fading a little bit, and this kind of peace and love vibe was coming in with Manchester. Totally. With the hair getting longer, the flared jeans, and it was a wee bit. Drugs were coming into play, and violence was on the decrease a wee bit. And they didn't really fit in with the lad culture in that respect.
That's true.
They were almost a student band to start with. The indie kids liked them. It was kind of. It wasn't really kids that were going to fit before I brought the Stone Roses. So they've kind of been punted now as this thing that I didn't see them as at the time. Do you see it as a change in the culture, a big change in the culture at the time when the Stone Roses came in?
I mean, they were right at the forefront of that, you know. I mean, the Spiral Carpets as well, and that sort of time. I remember holding back from it though, do you know what I mean? Because I was still into I was more into dance music than bands are, but yeah, that's each to their own though, you know.
There's a lot of that culture though. We've mentioned the Manchester scene, you mentioned the club scene, right? There's a wee bit of crossover with somewhere, because you get guys turning up to club nights that like the Manchester thing. You get guys who were into football would be going to clubs and it was still wearing terrace gear into clubs as well. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't. I think Glasgow in particular went pretty dressed up at the time. Glasgow, if you're into town, probably you couldn't get into certain clubs if you were dressed a certain way. So Glasgow was big on John Richmond jackets, John Paul Gaultier and all that sort of stuff. And your Armand Bazzi and that kind of thing. It was quite a cool scene in Glasgow, where Lanarkshire, where I come from, the guys ventures towards Ayr, the Dinsport, Prestwick, stuff like that. The terrace look still kind of, you could get into the places, so people still wore Timberland mocks and Bra Fallon and everything like that. Do you know what I mean? It didn't really take over and change the culture as much in Lanarkshire, I don't think.
Glasgow always had its own scene, you know what I mean? It would move quite quick, you know, sometimes a bit fickle, you know what I mean? But yeah, I remember that, the way the Glasgow clubs were at the time. Remember that.
But where were we going in London or down south at the time?
Well, I used to club in Glasgow before I moved down south. So it was Tin Pan Alley and where else was it? The Tunnel and stuff like that. Remember Carnegie's? There was a pub sort of club there.
That was on Union Street.
I think so. Aye. Warehouse. Went to that a few times.
The Warehouse.
So I got the taste for clubbing, and then I moved down south, and it was between Reading and London. And Covent Garden, the Garden Club, they had a club on a Friday night called Yellow Book. So, and that introduced me to Italian House. And that was like DJs like Terry Farley, Rocky and Diesel, Andy Weatherall, stuff like that. So it was all the London club scene. So the first proper club I was at was the Garden Club in Covent Garden. And then it's really kicked off about 91. And there was a Visit Flying in Soho, and was clubs outside London, Share Your Tongue and Bracknell, and then the town of Reading, they got its own scene, and it was basically every week were out clubbing, you know.
Did you find it better going down to London and leaving Glasgow behind in the respect that what I know about Glasgow clubbing then? Obviously, certain clubs were more orientated towards the Rangers mob, and other clubs were more orientated towards the Celtic mob. And nobody really wants to go clubbing and have to look over your shoulder, do they?
Yeah.
So I'd imagine if you went down south, you're kind of leaving the past behind you a wee bit.
Aye, that's a good point. I mean, apparently it was the same in Liverpool and Manchester. You're always having to look, watch your back, and there was feuds a lot of the time where I suppose people selling stuff, you know. But I remember the clubs in London. I don't know, it was none of that. It was a lot of more, probably more middle class people go to these clubs and like models, and I didn't feel threatened, and a lot of it was in central London, and nothing, I didn't notice, that scene down there, you wouldn't have had to watch your back.
Because people talk as though 89 came along, people popped a pill and the football hymn died and everybody fell in love with each other. It took a wee while for that to fade into everybody's psyche and for people to hang up their boots, as it were, and get on.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? It did take a wee while for it to happen. There was a few club nights that had quite scary events after the club or during the club, do you know what I mean? So it didn't happen overnight.
No, I know. And as I say, there was always these feuds that when there was business, wasn't there?
Aye.
You know what I mean?
Aye, when people started making a few quid out
No,
of it, changed.
Yeah. I think that's the last thing you want to see when you're on the dance floor and you're sort of happy, let's just say.
Your moods enhanced somewhat.
Yes.
So when did you move back up here at the time, or were you still down south for a while?
I was, from about 95, 96, my now wife, she moved down to Reading, and we were in some bands, but at that time I was wanting to move back to Scotland, so in 2000 eventually got transferred back up with my job to Dunfermline and Inverkeithing, that area, and I've been back since 2000, and back into football.
Did you miss the football?
Yeah, I still had a season ticket here. I'd still come up. once a month, once every 6 weeks. But then I was always planning to come home, and then it was good timing because when I came back in 2000, it was the Martin O'Neill time and stuff like that. So been back since. Don't go to many gigs these days, I must admit, but my social time is football, seeing yourself, mixing at weekends with some like-minded guys, you know what I mean?
Did you take on board a football team when you were down south? Did you go to any?
I went to see Arsenal a couple of times, I liked West Ham. But yeah, it was just to keep my interest up in football. I went a few games, yeah. No massive.
Right. So you came back up here, what was happening in Scotland at the time?
I remember at the time, most people were just into bands and stuff. There was a few clubbing reunions, but I remember the clubs scene I was into wasn't very big. It wasn't as popular. But then all the reunions started, like the club reunions started again. And
The kind of nostalgic stuff?
That's right, and I remember that starting to happen going into the 2000s, 2004 and stuff like that. So, and they seem to still be going. There's a lot of day clubbing now, I think. I've seen.
I think that's became quite popular for
Yeah.
people of a certain age into day clubbing.
Yes.
You can get yourself home for 10 o'clock at night
Aye.
and for like an all day. I've said this before on previous podcasts. I watched the Glasgow Clubbing podcast with You'll Be Hot, and I find it really interesting them being nostalgic about their journey through house music and all that kind of stuff. But I'm kind of envious that it never really caught me, that musically.
Yeah, I remember you saying that.
I did enjoy some of that kind of music at the time when I was in an event or in the atmosphere, just because it was the ideal music for that kind of stuff. But when the night was over, I never listened to music just for me personally.
It was like, wasn't it classic stuff, like, you know what I mean?
And I wish it did catch me because I quite like the scene, and I like a lot of the guys that are in the scene. My passion for that kind of music just isn't there.
But when you were there, you were obviously into, I think you've talked about it before, you were still into bands and like the Doors and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, it's funny though, because when we were young, I liked a lot of electronic stuff we were talking about. I did like New Order.
Yeah.
I really liked Depeche Mode when I was young. I liked a lot of stuff that was electronic. I liked a lot of soul music. So most guys who start off that by going, they progress into dance, they progress into house, they might go into techno or whatever. For me, that just didn't happen.
I mean, some of it, when you think back then, you listen to it, it's just beats that, you know what I mean? When you look at it now, not ideal, it's a lot of it. There's certainly still a lot of classic stuff. And music is therapy. Sometimes when you listen to it, it's got to be the right time, the right mood. And I think clubbing tracks maybe a bit much sometimes when you're trying to chill. And
do you look back on that time in your life with nostalgia though, or have you any bad memories yet?
No, it's very nostalgic about it. Then again, I think you sort of lost yourself in it, you know. And, there was there's times when you probably became sort of insular with it, you know. But no, good times.
See, for me personally, I remember having some of the best times in my life at 17, 18 and all some of that stuff. Not just because the mood enhancer's right, because of the whole unity. I love meeting new people. I love being in a congregation of people who are listening to music. I just loved it. I thought some of the scene was great. I love going to different places. I like the fashion going about it. I loved all that kind of stuff. I remember it getting a bit diluted a few years down the line, but the music getting a bit like a car alarm going off. Do you know what I mean?
That's right.
It's on top of the pops now, and I think the purists had left the building now, and Joe Public was getting into it. But I also think
the rise of mix mag maybe and all that time when it just became really commercial.
Again, that's just my take on it, right? But I also think when you're living like that for a period of years, the anxiety was getting a bit of the better of me now. So the end of it, looking back on was the fondest time in my life. So I think there's a lot of guys out there who paid the price for being awake for 3 days of the week for 5 or 6 years of their life and smoking dope every morning, noon and night for 5 years or whatever. And some people it may not affect others. I think it was no sunshine and rainbows at the end of it for a lot of people.
Maybe. It's certainly a time where a lot of carefree people were going about.
I think, I don't know, we can see not to put a negative slant on anything, but I think the 90s certainly opened the door to normalising drug culture, and it's got to be where the day with this cocaine epidemic we're in, do you know what I mean? I think we need to watch we don't glamorise it too much. I think it's been the door opener for that kind of attitude and normality of those drugs. It took it way out of the underground and into the mainstream and beyond thereafter, didn't it? Did see during the Oasis Blur thing and all that, did you go to the gigs or did you go to Loch Lomond?
I was at Loch Lomond. I think Cass played at that one, the one I went to. Red Zone as well, it was a Saturday. I went to that.
Red Zone are playing soon again, I noticed they're playing soon, Red Zone.
And I went to a few Oasis gigs after that, SACC, seen Liam a couple of times. So I was going to quite a few gigs. So
you were an Oasis guy, not a Blur guy?
Definitely. Although Blur did a lot of good stuff. You know what I mean?
I like both as well. I did like both. I would say I was an Oasis guy, but I did like Blur as well. Like you say, I did the Feel of Trackies and the Kappa Girls, you know, that were quite appealing at the time, and the look that Liam had of the game was spot on at the time.
Well, there's a picture of Oasis outside, I think, Main Road, and they're wearing the terrace gear, and it just looked like lads, you know. And then there's another picture of Blur at Piccadilly at the stairs, and they're just standing there, and they've got Kappas on, and it just looked like something from the 80s. So that was refreshing, I think. You know?
I like how they kind of mixed up with the rain wee slant on it. Blur in particular did do that, definitely.
Yeah.
The Damien Reeves love beats and all that kind of stuff, do you know what I mean?
I never thought I'd see Serge or Feel I come back, ever, until they did, you know.
Aye.
You know what I mean?
Aye, but probably made a bit too accessible at times, to be honest with you, but I loved all that stuff when it came back again.
Aye. It's still in the goal, you know what I mean?
I guess probably some guys like the old DNA at this point in time, do you know what I mean?
I think it's how you wear it. You know?
So after Oasis Blur, the kind of Britpop pound, did you stick with bands after that?
Quite a few. I did like Pulp as well, I must admit. But nowadays, I do look for new bands here and I should more, so I tend to still look back. The most recent one I really have enjoyed is the War on Drugs, the American band. Absolutely fantastic. That's one of my favourites in the last few years. Apart from that, I should look more into new bands, but I tend to sort of just keep going back. I do like a lot of the 80s and 90s stuff still. You know?
I think you're right though in relation. I think there is new music out there.
Yeah.
I think there's good music out there, but I think you need to look a bit harder to find it now.
Yeah.
The absence of Top of the Pops and stuff like that for one, and I think young people view music a bit differently. They listen to the tracks rather than albums, and they're a bit more open-minded than us. I know they're not really trying to be part of a subculture.
It can't be, you know.
So they just kind of like what they like.
I'll come across something and I'll think, what's that, you know? And then from there I'll start liking it, you know.
But a lot of the bands I mean, the Oasis reunions have been one of the biggest things that's happened in music in recent years. Pulp played the Hydro last week and it was sold out and the place looked absolutely bouncing. Caster's still on the go, the Charlottes are still on the go.
Yeah.
Bands, I mean, the Charlottes must have kicked off about 88 or something like that, do you know what I mean? And these bands seem to just be as popular as ever. And from a selfish perspective, I like the fact that the bands in my day are still playing, I can still go and see them.
Yes.
But I kind of fear for the youth that there's nothing else coming up to replace this lot.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? I read the other day that Simon Fowler, Fulton Carson had turned 60 and I was like, fucking, how did that happen?
I know, I still see him as the same guy. Yeah.
How did that happen? Do you know what I mean? And it's like, these kind of bands are still playing and we're still getting enjoyment out of it, but we've got a generation, I think, that we just don't let go of our youth.
Yeah.
I mean, grow up a bit, but we still want to hold on to the 80s and 90s for sure.
I mean, for me, Andy Weatherall's been a constant as well. Unfortunately passed away a few years, but not just his DJing sets, but the remixes he did and his later stuff just totally gets me, you know, still to this day. So massive influence. That I'll still go back into his back catalogue and listen to even the dance music. Some of it's not as heavy. Some of it, you know what I mean, there's a lot of disco stuff as well. and he kept changing his genre all the time, you know.
I know he famously done the Primal Scream, Screamadelica. What else did he do at the time that was groundbreaking?
Yeah.
Just for a guy who doesn't, I'll get the knowledge on that kind of scene.
Well, he was involved in the Boys Own scene, obviously, which was a clubbing scene, which was quite alternative. But the amount of remixes that he really did, some of the backlog catalogue is amazing. I'd still say Screamadelica is probably the best stuff. Yeah.
Again, a groundbreaking album of its time. An album that crossed over all genres and all. I think the indie kids liked it. I think the guys who were into dance liked it. Everybody likes Screamadelica. Again, a band that stood the test of time was Primal Scream.
Yeah. I think if it wasn't for Weatherall at the time, it would have been as big, you know, because he remixed that album and then.
I definitely, he definitely catapulted them into a different dimension, didn't he?
Yeah.
He brought them into the modern day at the time. He took them from an indie band into whatever Primal Scream became, where they seem to reinvent themselves every album thereafter.
Yeah.
Which is, for a guy who likes nostalgia like that, but Primal Scream, they keep reinventing themselves.
Yes, without a doubt.
So I'm going to take you to the album that we've asked you to bring along tonight, right? We ask each guest to bring along an album that's not necessarily your favourite, but could be your favourite, but it's had a big impact on you. And your album of choice is?
New Gold Dream, Simple Minds. And this is probably the golden thread that goes through all that. You just said there, your favourite, I think there's maybe 3 or 4 in there, but this would be the one I would always eventually come to. Started listening to this about 83, 84, and it's just been a constant.
Was it a difficult choice for you to bring an album right what one to bring?
No. I thought it would be, and there was a few in there. Definitely maybe would have been maybe there, but I mean this one definitely is the constant. There's 4 tracks on here, Somewhere in Summertime, Big Sleep, Hunter and the Hunted, and the actual song New Gold Dream that just stand out, and it's one of the albums you can, New Gold Dream, it's just like a dream, you know, you can sit and...
See this album, where does it lie in Simple Minds' catalogue? E.g., was it the first, second, third album?
Actually, good question. I'm not sure if I think Sparkle in the Rain was maybe just after it, but that's another one I would maybe choose. I'd heard up in the catalogue a few times when I first started to listen to Simple Minds and Book of Million Things. And a friend of mine, Paul McHugh, gave me this album to listen to, and I think that when I played it, I just kept playing it, and it got me. That was the first time I could really say that opened up things musically. You know?
Well, you mentioned Simple Minds at the start of the podcast there, and you mentioned Once Upon a Time, the album they're playing in a couple of weeks' time, coincidentally at Bella Houston Park. For me, I really like Once Upon a Time, I think it's a great album, but for guys like you are probably bigger Simple Minds fans than I am, it's probably the one that they don't like so much because it's probably more poppy.
Yeah.
It's probably, people are probably who don't know much about Simple Minds were they there at the time, don't realise how groundbreaking they are, I don't think.
Yeah, totally, yeah. There's a really good documentary on them. I think you watched it before.
Yeah.
And,
fairly recent documentary.
Yeah, it was, last year. But yeah, Once Upon a Time, I love it as well, but I just remember people putting it down, you know. And I couldn't wait for the next album. Maybe when I look at it now, on hindsight, I can see that the albums before that are better, you know.
Which other albums you were toying between?
Probably, as I say, definitely maybe Screamadelica would be in there. That would be my top 3, I think.
And have you been into this since the early 80s then?
Yeah.
And it's never quite left you, Simple Minds then?
No. So, yeah.
There's a pattern, I think, with guys like of our generation. Anybody about our age we've spoke to or heard on the pod tends to get a band when they were forming their identity, I think.
Yeah, that's
a school
good way of
time.
putting it. Yeah,
and they're forming their allegiances to their tribes.
Yeah.
And it kind of sticks with, for me, it's the Jam. But Paul Nelson a wee while ago, and he was an AC/DC to start off with. that's probably still his kind of favourite type of music. I think there's something about that when you're forming your tastes and your identity. Favourite band, people go back to the one of the 80s or the 90s when they were growing up. It's going to be their favourite band. You'll not get many people who will say the War on Drugs is their favourite band. The one they've discovered in recent years.
And I love Paul Weller's solo stuff, you know what I mean? In the last 5 years. There's an orchestra album he's done. And even love that one, you know. So that's
well,
there.
Not to bang on about Paul Weller, everybody knows I love Paul Weller, not to bang on about him, but what I like about Weller is he evolves in each album, and if he's not evolving with a new album, like the orchestral one, he's experimenting with old stuff and he brings out different versions of it, so it's still new to you.
That's right.
Still listening to something new. Which I think it's great that these guys are still producing music. I don't know if Simple Minds are bringing any new stuff out. Obviously we know they're touring now, but I don't know if they're bringing any new stuff.
They still bring out the albums quite regular. I do find that you'll get 2 or 3 classics of those albums, you know. But I mean, when they did a couple of gigs, I think it was at the Hydro, they did different versions of their songs, like Brilliant Things was sung by one of the lady members of the band. It was just amazing, you know. So.
Well, they brought the acoustic album a few years ago. That was pretty good.
The guitar in the front.
That was really good. The acoustic album was great.
I thought to myself that this won't work, but it did. You know, Katie Tunstall was on it as well. I think.
Was she?
The tracks, yeah.
Aye, it's good that they're bringing out stuff and they're revamping, let me hear it from a different angle again. And you can keep the music alive, I think. So, Alan, with that, I'd like to thank you very much for coming on the pod.
Thank you.
Thanks for bringing the album along with me, and it's been a pleasure chatting to you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much appreciated. Cheers, buddy. Thanks, guys.